Good evening, everyone. We're so glad to see you here at the Palmer Lecture. Let me explain a little bit about this. This is the 40th Palmer Lecture. The Palmer Lecture was established by the Palmer family, which longtime Free Methodist supporters of SPU, and they established an endowment many years ago. Actually, there's several undergraduate theology major scholarships, so some of you students may be receiving money from the Palmer family, but in addition to the scholarships, they also endowed a lectureship. And we've been honored to be able to have this most every year. It's not always quite every year. And we've been blessed to bring noted people from around the country and even the world to bless us with their expertise, their perspective. Helps to widen our lens so that we have more points of view. And we're really honored then in that tradition, and we've had some amazing people to add another amazing person to that lineup, and that's Dr. Ralph Watkins. Let me tell you just a bit about him. Dr. Watkins is I like to note that he is part of our Wesleyan tradition. He's ordained in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is very similar to our Free Methodist background in many ways, and we were just sharing about our common Wesleyan ethos. He talked about his grandfather being an AME pastor, and remember seeing him when he was young, and so is Dr. Watkins is ordained AME, though currently on loan, I guess, to a Baptist church in Atlanta. We'll let him do that for a few years before he comes back to our fold here. And we're also blessed because of his background and what his expertise is, which is in the fields, and I would say it's an interesting and wonderful interdisciplinary connection between the arts, visual arts, photography, videography, music. He's a musician, lover of many different genres of music. And then theological fields, especially practical theology in areas of homiletics, preaching, and especially evangelism and the sharing of the gospel, what we would say more broadly in ideas of missiology. What does it mean to actually share the gospel of Jesus with others? And we're so thankful for that. So he models for us what's important for so many of us in the School of Theology is being both church people devoted to the ministry of the church and to the academy, and we're very blessed to have him here. So he is currently the Peachtree Associate Professor of Evangelism and Church Growth at Columbia Theological Seminary, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. And some of you who are more longtime folks here at SPU will know that he was asked to go to Columbia because of his friend Steve Hayner, who many of you, of course, remember with great fondness. Dr. Watkins has a whole host of degrees, BA, MA, DMin, and PhD, but the one that I find most compelling, actually, Dr. Watkins, is that after doing all those degrees, as many of us did relatively early in our lives, he just a few years ago, how many years ago? Oh, just 1 year ago, finished a Master of Fine Arts because he realized that he was not connecting. We did not have the training that he felt was necessary for continuing effective teaching and preaching for this generation. I'll tell you, it takes a lot of humility for a PhD to go back to school, and especially in a field that's not the one you've been trained in and in a completely different area, which an MFA is. I have to tell you, I couldn't do that. So I'm very honored to and humbled by that example. I think it says a lot to all of us who are academics in the room. How are we retraining ourselves to be able to be more effective in the classroom? I think I have a ways to go here, so you're a great example for us. He's a enormously published author, many books. I'm not even going to list them, but they have to do especially with this intersection between popular culture, especially in the African American tradition, but even more broadly, and the church, issues of hip hop and then other forms of jazz and other genres of music and that connection. He's written on black theology, and especially has a forthcoming book on that. What I found interesting is that he worked in Israeli-Palestinian efforts towards trying to work on peace. He's been a foremost and very devoted champion of women in ministry. So in so many ways, he connects well with just the things that we think are important here. But he's going to help us in really new ways tonight by talking about the absolutely essential way that the visual is important in the proclaiming of the gospel. And I can't help but think that 2017 is the 500th anniversary of the 95 Theses, right? And that could only have been taken place because of just a few years before the 95 Theses was the invention of the movable printing press with Gutenberg. And what we see is an incredible change 500 years ago that switched us into the literate culture that we know. And one wonders, are we now at another turning point in terms of communication of the gospel? If so, Dr. Watkins is one of the ones on the forefront leading us into that new space. For that, I am so grateful for your coming to be with us. Let's welcome him.
Oh, that was a nice introduction. Thank you. Thank you for having me and allowing me to come and share what I'm thinking about. Yeah, went back to school in my early 50s, Savannah College of Art and Design, because I felt a sense of call that I was not equipped to help this next generation of thinkers and communicators. While I played photography and made a few videos and went to a few weekend sessions, I wasn't thoroughly trained enough, I felt, to help us communicate in what I call the visual age. I was trained to write and to speak and to read. And I'm not divorcing myself from those gifts or those calls or the need for us to have those. But I felt in the age in which we are living that the visual was important. So how could I do that? So I went back to school with the support of my wife and my 3 wonderful adult children who thought it was so funny to see Daddy graduate from college. But my daughter said, where you pay back our loans, we're not paying back your loans. So there you see with my wife, my wonderful wife, and my oldest daughter, Nastasia, she's a lawyer in Durham, North Carolina. My daughter, Nicole, who's a nursing professor at the University of Maryland, and our son. So now I call myself the scholar with the camera, trying to bridge those worlds of what I've historically been trained in reference to the issues of how to do scholarship, but now trying to marry that with my use of the camera to tell stories. Photography literally means writing with light. It means writing with light. And so the question I've always wrestled with, I'm presently wrestling with, is how do we use the light to share the light? There's that famous scripture in John chapter 8, verse 12. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. In an age where people are living through images, what does this mean for the image of the church? How do people see the church on platforms like Instagram and Flickr and Facebook? While we are committed to being a part of what God is doing in the world, how do we share with the world what God is doing, and especially what God is doing through the church? I proudly call myself an evangelical. It's been an interesting conversation in my community in Atlanta, Georgia, when some folks say 83% of evangelicals voted for Donald Trump. Let's back up. I pastor a black Baptist church in Atlanta, Georgia. and proudly call myself an evangelical. And folks are trying to define me because of who's the president of the United States. But they don't know. At the Wheat Street Baptist Church, we're in the process of a $24 million renovation of a 400-unit housing complex that was built in the 1970s that houses persons who are struggling with homelessness and low income to move in downtown Atlanta. Now, the folk who judge my evangelical identity don't know that's what we're doing because we've not told the story. We've not shared the story, what God's doing in the world to challenge injustice as evangelicals in Atlanta, Georgia. So how do we use the light? How do we use light to share the light? If photography really and literally means writing with light, let me show you a brief video of a phone. Let me say this before I start. I am not trying to sell you Apple telephones. Hello? Even though I'm a member of the cult, right? I mean, I am a Steve Jobs junkie. Anything that Apple sells, I buy. Are you with me? Okay. I have every iPad, every mini, every phone, every incarnation I have bought, all right? But this next video is interesting to me about how light is used. Because photography means writing with light, and we are sharing the light of the world with the world. How are we seeing and using the light? So watch this video shot with an iPhone and look for the light. Here we go. Remember when cell phones looked like that? You remember that? You guys remember. But that's how cell phones looked, right? And the battery lasted for about 15 minutes. Anybody remember those phones, right? We could not afford those phones. Your uncle or aunt was very rich had those kinds of phones. These were when cell phones were actually telephones. They are no longer telephones. They've actually become something else. While we still call them cell phones, they're not cell phones. If you look at the most recent ad of Apple trying to sell its latest phone, it never uses the phone as the phone. Are you all still with me? Matter of fact, check out the ad and answer the question if you watch the ad. What are they selling? It's not a matter of fact, I don't use my telephone to talk. Huh? I text on my phone, right? I talk to Siri on my phone because Siri knows what? Everything. Right, here we go. Watch the ad and ask, what are they selling? Here we go.
I live in a nameless town. No need to wander around. I live in a nameless town. Blackout. Midnight where we used to dance. Underneath the earthly halogen lamps. All went away so fast. Blackout. We'll wait for the year when the time comes.
He never makes a phone call with the cell phone. He goes around, takes pictures, and makes a movie. Del Barris, in his book, Flash Foresight, argues, we can see the future. There are some things we know. We'll never go back to a time that we're not intimately connected to our cell phones. And I mean intimately connected to our cell phones. If I leave home and leave my cell phone, I will turn around. Come on, somebody, talk to me. Anybody, come on now. Have you ever had the feeling that you didn't know where your cell phone was? Anybody up in here? Hello, come on now. Lord have mercy, Jesus. I was just in the room next door, and I left my cell phone in my jacket pocket. And I had this panic moment. Lord, if I lost my cell phone, talk to me, somebody. If I lost my cell phone, there was a time you had to remember people's phone numbers. I don't know anybody's phone number. If I got arrested and they said you can make one phone call, I would say, please give me my cell phone. I don't know my wife's phone number. Hello, somebody. So what Daniel Burris argues in his book is, we know there are some things that are not going to change. We're never going back to a time without these things that are intimately connected to us, literally connected to us. We don't call people's homes anymore. We call people's phones. Hello, somebody? But here's the issue. Clayton Christensen says, while we know this reality exists, how do we innovate? How do we innovate when we're so tied to serving traditional markets? How do we change in a time we're so locked in doing what we've always done? To do different calls us out. 2 questions. How do we change what we teach? How do we teach and communicate in a visual world? How do we serve the traditional core while developing the emerging periphery? But he argues there's ways to make the shift and make the move if we first confess the dilemma that we find ourselves in, and we are in a dilemma. In Fred Rich's book, After Photography, he calls our attention to how the visual and digital media is reshaping us in ways we may not be cognizant of. He calls our attention to the reality that we have entered the digital age, and the digital age has entered us. Listen to what he says. We've entered the digital age, and the digital age has entered us. We are no longer the same people we once were, for better or worse. He goes on to say, it's inevitable. The changes in media, especially media as pervasive as the digital, require that we live differently with shifting perceptions and expectations. This age requires that we live differently. How are we living differently? How are we to be a different kind of church in a different age? We keep trying to dress the church up. But if the world has changed this dramatically, we can't afford to keep playing dress up. Y'all still with me? Hello? When I was a kid, I played dress up. Y'all didn't play dress up? I dressed up as the pastor of the church. Yeah, I was preaching, and my members were Ken and Barbie. You know them, Ken and Barbie? They joined the church every Sunday. But what does it mean to be a different church in a different world? Richard goes on to argue, our cosmos is different, as in our sense of time. Our sense of community is different, as is our sense of ourselves. Yesterday was my birthday. 586 people on Facebook wished me happy birthday. Are y'all with me? And I knew about 200 of them. Hello? But the point was, it used to be the birthday party was at Chuck E. Cheese. Y'all remember those parties? With that horrible food. Thank God your kids were up, right? Hello? It was just that little circle that celebrated. The world has now changed dramatically. Y'all still with me? If the world is mediated differently, then the world is different. But the question becomes, how different is the church? And how different are the places that prepare folk to lead the church? I was in a seminary preaching class before I came here. At my seminary, we're teaching little preachers to be like old preachers. Hello? We're teaching them to preach in a way and at a time that no longer exists. The whole class on a 3-point sermon with a poem and a shout. But ain't nobody in the church to hear your 3-point poem and a shout. Hello? They're all online, waiting for you to get online. Are you still with me? But are we teaching and training our folk for a church that no longer exists? And it's part of the issue is that we as faculty are not willing to be transformed so we can then prepare students and leaders for a world that is different. The book Networked, Lee Rain and Barry Wellman talk about we now live in a world where people have a different operating system. We're not the people we once were. They say in their book that people have become increasingly networked as individuals, rather than embedded in groups. We call this network individualism, an operating system, because it describes the ways in which people connect, communicate, and exchange information. People don't need institutions to connect them. They're using the tools they have to connect themselves and build community differently. Community is not what it once was. Matter of fact, I woke up on my birthday to see how many folk had said happy birthday to me on Facebook. Because I knew how to get my old students who I taught years ago would say, Doc, happy birthday. My old church members, preacher, happy birthday. My old folk pastor, happy birthday. My mama's friends. Baby, you still look good. Hello, come on. My old girlfriends. Girl, you missed out on a good thing, baby. Yeah. I couldn't wait. And I felt so good, and I replied to everybody, and I took my picture with a special filter and put it on Facebook. You with me? So what's happening is I'm connecting with folk, but much different than I did 20 years ago. Different operating system. Fueled by what they argue is called the triple revolution. What's the triple revolution? It's the internet. It's the mobile revolution and the social network revolution. Let's walk through them quickly. The internet. The internet revolution has given people communications power and information gathering capacity that dwarf those in the past. It's allowed people to become their own publishers and broadcasters and created new methods of social networking. How many remember encyclopedias? Oh, come on. Now, I was raised in the South in an impoverished community. There was one family on our street that had a set of Britannica encyclopedias. And when it came time to do your homework, you go knock on Mr. and Mrs. Blackman's door and say, can I borrow the M to do my homework? Y'all remember that? To do my homework. Y'all remember that, right? Now we have J Store. Y'all remember, come on now. Times have changed. I remember when I bought my first, matter of fact, Vanessa and I, my wife, our first major investment was a set of Britannica encyclopedias, $35 a month for the rest of your life. Do y'all remember that? Right? I remember my first video camera, $700. World has changed dramatically. The mobile revolution has allowed our devices to become body appendages, allowing people to access friends and information at will. There's continuous presence and pervasive awareness of others in the network. People's physical separation by time and space are less important. Y'all still with me? Because this technology actually annihilates time and space, and the church centers itself on being in the same space at the same time. How do we wrestle with this? Thirdly, social network. The social network revolution has provided opportunities and stresses for people to reach beyond the world of tight groups. It has afforded more diversity in relationships and social worlds, as well as bridges to reach these worlds and maneuverability among them. The triple revolution. Now, what we found is this in this revolution. They say the evidence of their work is that none of these technologies are isolated or isolating. They're being incorporated into people's social lives much like their predecessors were. People are not hooked on gadgets, they're hooked on each other. Y'all with me? Like other gadgets. Like what other gadgets? You all are probably too young to remember when the telephone first arrived. Does anybody remember having telephones that had party lines? Okay. How about this one? My mother's out, her father's out. You're on the phone talking to your girlfriend. You remember those conversations? You say bye. No, you say bye. No, you say bye. No, you say bye. What you doing? Nothing. You still just breathing. I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about you. Your mama home? No. Then the phone. This is the operator calling. I'm breaking in. There's an emergency call from Ralph Watkins. Will you release the line? Yeah. Y'all remember that? But the phone we thought would once isolate us connected us. My wife fell in love with me on the telephone. I remember the first time she told me she loved me. It went like this. I said, I've never told any girl ever that I love them, but I love you. I said, do you love me? She was quiet. I said my standard party line, I take your silence for a yes. So we're finding these gadgets are helping us connect with people. We're using these gadgets to build community. They go on to say a major difference in the past and now is that the social ties people enjoy today, listen to what they say, are more abundant and more easily nourished by contact through new technologies. Huh? Okay, I'm in Seattle. My wife is in Austell, Georgia, the principal of Cooper Middle School. She called me today, not just telephoned me, she FaceTimed me. Hello, hello, not one time, not two times, but three times, hello. So even though I'm thousands of miles away from my sweet baby, I could see her face. And so she said to me as she was talking on FaceTime, on my iPad, she said, give me a kiss. And I said, mwah. So the point is, they're not pulling us apart, they're pulling us together. So now when I travel to speak or to teach, I'm not nearly as lonely. Because what I do now, when we watch Scandal together, we'll have the iPad there and the computer there, and we're literally watching it as we sense together. But in this changed and different world, how will we prepare leaders to communicate in this world? And something happened on January the 9th, 2007. Now, my brother's birthday is January the 9th, but I was not celebrating his birthday. On that day, January the 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs comes to Macworld and says, today we're going to revolutionize the phone. And I said, because prior to this, I was a BlackBerry king. How many remember the BlackBerry? I could type an email out and knock you out. I could reply immediately, hello? But then this thing comes out that revolutionizes the phone. And what happened was the triple revolution was embraced in that phone. Remember? It was an internet communicator, it was a music player, and the phone with a camera and no keyboard. And we start living through the glass. Y'all sit with me. I have every incarnation of the phone, and I'm holding on to them because they're going to be worth something down the road. So what happened with this phone is that we began to marry this world of social networking, and then comes this thing called social media, right? Let me give you my definition of social media. My definition is social media designed to be shared or spread through social networks on social media networking sites via digital platforms. This is the dominant means of communication in this age. Are you following me? Huh? If you don't know that language, you can't communicate. Matter of fact, I don't care where you stand politically. Something that Donald Trump understood was how to communicate in 140 characters. Are y'all with me? If I ask you right now, what was Trump's slogan? What was it? What was Hillary's? Uh-oh. Yeah. He understood something that we're missing. Are you following me? So this media, which includes both print, but primarily visual media, that's intended to be shared. And we share it. We share it. We share it. We retweet. We share pictures. We share videos. We share it. So we're living in an age of this is the dominant form of communication, but are we training folk how to communicate in this world? Matter of fact, at my school, we're trying to teach students they have to write papers. Anybody still doing that? You got to write papers. You got to write I was in seminary. I wrote more papers in seminary than I started pastoring. I ain't wrote a paper since. Hello. Come on, now I was writing papers and papers and papers and papers. Man, I don't remember what I wrote. Hello? Man, if some folk read my book, say, you wrote that in the book. I remember I wrote that in the book. But they say I wrote it. I must have did write it. So here's the question. How are we empowering folk to communicate in this world that has changed and we're never, ever going back? So how pervasive is this, Ralph? I hear you talking. It sounds good. It's cute. But how pervasive is social media? Well, let's see what Eric Quellman says about the pervasiveness of social media. Here we go. We're not going back. We're here to stay and moving more rapidly. But are we teaching this preacher to live in that world? Or are we teaching this preacher to do this a little better than she's been doing it? Will that work in a world dominated by media worthy of being shared, in a world where Flickr, as an example, has 92 million users with 1 million photos posted daily? And at the core of this sense of how some would argue this is a very fragmented way in which we live our lives. What we find is these bits and pieces are linking us, connecting us. I think about the persons who will hopefully post something from this lecture tonight and will tag Ralph Basui. Hello, tweet that right there. That the folk in Atlanta are following what I'm doing today. They're putting this story together. So what we see is these bits and fragments of sharing the making of this whole. Matter of fact, listen to Jason Silva as he talks about a bit about this, what he calls ambient intimacy, how we're connecting with folk in this age. Let's watch this video.
People talk a lot these days about our increasingly fragmented lives. We're living our lives online, and somehow it's not real. It's not accurate. We're not really exchanging intimacies on Facebook and Twitter, is what people argue. But there's a term out there that I found much more interesting that actually says, look, our exchanges may not be the same as in the meat space, but they're still real exchanges. And I think the term used was ambient intimacy. That, seeing bits and pieces of your friends and family's digital lives, seeing snippets of a photograph, seeing an announcement of a birthday, seeing the stuff that they're posting, does give you a sort of perspective, a sort of taste of where they're at. You are getting an accurate picture, an accurate snapshot, an accurate exchange of where this person is at in their lives. There's nothing inauthentic about this interpersonal exchange that's occurring all the time. In other words, it's just another space for communication. It's not better or worse, except for the fact that it does collapse geography. It gets rid of the limitations of time, space, and distance, and allows us to expand the parameters of what we can sample, right? The internet is an infinite tapas bar, and so maybe we're not having the full meal of just one thing anymore, but we're certainly expanding our horizons and expanding our possibility space and expanding the mind spaces, where we can travel to, This indictment of technology, this indictment of transformation of social media, I think a lot of times comes from a place of fear rather than a place of actually appreciating transformation and evolution in how we communicate.
How do we live in this world? How do we communicate in a world where Instagram, as of 2013, had 150 million active users, 16 billion photos shared? A world in which people are thinking about sharing a present experience. Are you following me? We used to talk about our remembered past and and how we thought about the past and construct, but we're now actually preparing for the past while living in the present. Does that make sense to you? I'm thinking about taking an image of the proposal while I'm making the proposal. That seems foreign to me, because now the lines of private and public are now blurred. We're living in a different world. Listen to Jason Silva again talk about how we're wrestling with what he calls the Instagram generation. And what I'm wrestling with is, how do we share the gospel with the Instagram generation? Let's watch this piece.
There's a fascinating article making the rounds on the internet recently about how the Instagram generation now experiences the present as an anticipated memory. The success of photo filtering apps on social media has created a generation of individuals who now believe that every present moment needs to be experienced as something that will be reflected upon later. And we take it upon ourselves to design what that later moment is going to feel like. We're living in two realities at the same time. It's what Daniel Kahneman used to refer to as the experiencing self and the remembering self. And they're working in concert. They're saying, be happy for this moment is your life. But guess what? This moment is going to be gone like this. And all you're going to have left is that photo filter vintage photograph. All you're going to have left is how you choose to remember this moment. So you're given a pen. You're given a chance to decide how this moment will be remembered. And I think that is fascinating. We all become artists. We all become architects of our mental narratives, of our historical digital paper trail. We decide who we are. We're building maps, and those maps are subjective. I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think it's fascinating. I think it liberates our desire to be artists, our desire to be the authors of our own lives, and to decide how we remember things, to decide how we deal with the fact that every moment passes, how we deal with that tragedy, how we deal with that entropy. At least we're going to italicize the memory of it. And so yes, the present is lived as anticipated memory because that's all we have is the anticipated memory. The present's gone. It's rich, but it's gone. And that, haunts me, but we deal with it.
Memory. Creating, curating, connecting, and developing community. I remember my kids were little. I would talk about making a memory. And so a few Christmases ago, a gift my kids got was we scanned photos of their life and put them in these photo albums. And what those memories mean. We now make memories quite differently. So we're now creating, curating, connecting community, defining and designing our lives in different ways. In Clayton Christensen's book, How Will You Measure Your Life? He talks about creating a life that's worth remembering. We are crafting our lives by imagining them, reimagining them, and constructing them through the use of images. Or Erwin McManus's book, The Artisan's Soul, where he argues the greatest thing we can do is curate our lives. As I was saying to some folk, I'm now 55 as of Monday, and saying, what's next in my life? And trying to curate that life. And a lot of this life in this age is centered around the photos we take and the photos we share. Every time I get a new phone, the thing I worry about most are my pictures. Y'all with me? Where did those pictures in the cloud go? And how do you retrieve them? Look at this ad. Let's think about that. Experience what it means to create, curate, connect, and remember. And the power of photos in that process, while simultaneously thinking about the power of photos and the sharing of what God's doing in the world and through God's church.
Your phone has been there for you. It's seen your best side and your worst days. It's there for you in the mornings, and it's the last thing you see at night. You go everywhere together. Everywhere. You've even saved its life. It's your loved ones, Daddy, your love notes, and your memories. It's been there through it all, in the palm of your hand. But forget that old piece of garbage, because you just got a brand new phone and it is glorious. It's got everything except your photos. So get the Google Photos app, and all the photos on your old phone will be waiting for you on your new phone automatically. It's a holiday miracle. Happier holidays from Google Photos.
So the foundation of these stories are our photos, right, that we take on our phones. And I think Nikon got it right in 2014. They said this generation is what they call generation image. They said this is generation image. Yeah, generation.
My generation creates tens of thousands of images literally in the blink of an eye. Our images speak for us. Are yours saying enough? It's time to be heard. I am Generation Image.
They say in that ad, our images speak for us. Is yours saying enough? It's time to be heard. Nikon in their research found that after extensive research, it became clear that the number of images captured and shared every day is significantly increasing. People are using their cameras as a tool to share what is important to them, and each have the potential for significant impact. So they're sharing images of what's important. They have the potential of making an impact. Let's move on. In 2014, people uploaded an average of 1.8 billion digital images every single day. That's 657 billion photos per year. I did not do the math. That was not my strong suit. Where are my math majors at? Hello. Every 2 minutes, humans take more photos than ever existed in total 150 years ago. That's amazing. Hello? That kind of blows my little mind. So my call is this. We have to develop leaders who have the capacity, what I call visual literacy, quoting Joanna Riddle. That's the ability to interpret, use, and create visual media in ways that advance thinking, decision-making, communication, learning. I'm arguing that as we were taught to read and to write, we have to include as a requirement in the curriculum this issue of visual literacy. If it is becoming the dominant means of communication, we are ill-serving our students if they don't leave institutions with the ability to partner this skill with the ones we have taught them. And I'm not saying either or, it's both and. But this can't be an elective in an age where we're primarily communicating through images. I mean, I stay on Instagram. Hello? I can't tell you how many photos I like on Facebook every single day. I have I don't know, about maybe thousands of images on Flickr. Go online and buy some of them. Here we go. This is the call. How we develop theologians, leaders, and thinkers who are visually literate, while not to forgo our writing and speaking skills, our critical thinking skills. I'm proposing reading, writing, math, and visual literacy as a key component of training future leaders. The church and its leaders have to be empowered to communicate in the visual world. This is a revolution of what I call visual communication. As a sociologist, I agree with Catherine Hyde when she says, as a sociologist, I'm interested in ways people see and understand their worlds and the paths that inspire or inhibit new ways of seeing and action. Sociology itself is about seeing, like photography is a way of seeing. We have to see and understand. We have to be able to interpret the world if we're going to minister to this world. We have to see so that we can know, and we have to know what we are seeing. Once we know, we can then talk back via the images we share in our communities of love and in response. If we're going to reach this world, we have to understand it and engage it. If we can't read what we see and respond visually, we will be silenced. We are here. Where's the church and those who are training future leaders to tell the story? This is where we are as a culture. I'm going to close with this.
With your feet in the air and your head on the ground. You try this trick and spin it. Your head will collapse, but there's nothing.
What are you looking at? Crazy stuff. Okay, you gotta see this.
Hey, what is this?
It's like some 3D virtual world.
Hey, can I see? Wow. Oh, yeah. Slow down and then I'll hop on.
Yeah, this is it.
I mean, this thing is definitely not rideable. You're going to need a whole new wheel. We might be able to salvage the hub. It looks like at the very least it's going to be a new rim, maybe a couple spokes.
Hey, wait, did you just pay for that with your phone?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Thanks.
Where is my mind? Where is my mind?
Will we be able to see the whole park?
Yeah, it's 360.
Yo, look, it goes all the way around.
Oh, that's so cool. Let's go.
I was swimming in the Caribbean. Animals were hiding behind the rock, except for the fish. And told me swear trying to talk to me.
Hey, Mom.
Where are you guys?
We'll be back soon. Love you. Bye, Mom.
Love you, Mom.
Love you, Mom.
Hey, guys!
So I threw a Galaxy ad at the end. So you won't think that I'm kind of this mole for Apple iPhones. Okay? We're in the midst of a visual revolution. It's a new world, new day. We'll never go back. How do we train leaders to share with the world what's God doing? Can they see God? And if we don't share with the tools we've been blessed with, I think we're missing a great opportunity to advance the gospel and to change the world in powerful ways. So, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. And time I leave this place, I'm going to the hotel, putting up my new MacBook computer, and FaceTiming Vanessa Watkins. Thank you so much. That's my time. Thank you very much. I'm open to comment, questions, thoughts, critiques, responses. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a question, how have you seen some strategies that work that increase the capacity to include the visual age in our pedagogy?
Well, hopefully I've modeled some of that, right? That hopefully what you've seen in these slides, not word slides, but image slides. And I think what's happening to you as a person in this room, those images may have spoken to you more than my words, right? Marrying the use of video, right? But implementing in the way we do the whole design. I think pedagogically, back to the book I mentioned earlier today, Nancy DeWorte's book about slideology. When you look at the templates for PowerPoint or Keynote, they were designed by engineers, not artists. So I treat my slide as a blank canvas. I use no templates for my slides. I don't want the 3 points on my slide. There are very few words on my slide. I'm trying to use this great tool we have, so my transitions are very intentional, right? So if I do a twist or a slide or a push, very intentional, right? Using very few words. I know what I'm going to say. I don't need to put it on the screen. Why am I going to read the screen for you? That's stupid. I mean, I'm not stupid. I didn't mean to say that, right? But why am I going to read the screen? That's like an overhead. This is an overhead. So I think what I'm trying to model, like using images, finding quality images, sometimes having to buy images that are not out there that I can do on Google, trying to find videos that I can use to implement and begin to move the argument forward that I can use. Those things are very important. I mean, I do the same thing in the church, right? When I'm preaching, it's a very visual presentation. But I think about my presentations visually first before I write them. Then I write. So I'm not allowing the writing to dictate and begin to take control of what I'm going to try to show. So I'm trying to show and tell, not tell and show. Make sense to you? Sometimes to show you what I'm talking about. And hopefully you saw what I was talking about. You saw the use of the phone, right? You saw it, right? And then I think for us, just moving away from our way we've been taught, for me to push myself to use images more and to understand what images work, why those images work. Make sense to you? Yeah. Yes.
What assignments do you make in your class? I'm so curious. I would like to sit in one of your classes and see what, as a student, you ask students to do that and invites them to embrace visual culture.
Well, the classes I teach are directly linked to that, so it's kind of easy, right? But one thing that I have done that's made it difficult for me as a teacher is trying to develop rubrics to give students freedom that I can grade fairly, right? But for example, I teach a course, reaching young adults in the digital and media age. So you can choose what you want to do. You can tell a story, you can do a series of images, you can make a film, you can do a blog, and I get it up front, right? But then there are different ways I grade those things in terms of the rubrics. The thing for me, the difficulty is trying to grade different assignments and try to be some sense fair and equitable. Now I teach a class called Evangelism and Photography. That's simple, right? You tell stories making images. I teach a class entitled Sharing the Gospel via Storytelling. You have to actually create videos, create a YouTube channel. I teach you how to shoot from the beginning of the class to the end of the class. You'll put together a 2.5, 3-minute piece of a video that tells a story that shares the gospel. But I teach you how to shoot from day one, right? So those kind of things that I do, right? But I also say to students that you can cite YouTube as a source if there's a story there. You can use images in your papers to expand your story. I don't limit my students to just writing papers, right? Because there's things they can begin to use, different tools that I didn't have. So why am I going to limit my students to tools that I only had? I had a typewriter. Anybody remember that? I had a typewriter in college, right? And I was big time. I had a typewriter with a self-correcting tape. Talk to me, somebody! So why with all of these resources do I limit my student? I don't. But also what I do that's a lot of work, but I do it. If you have an idea I haven't thought about, let's talk about it. Let's create a rubric for it, right? I'm giving them freedom because when I'm finding with my students who are younger, I don't think the way they think. They see these tools completely differently. I'm even limited trying to open it up. They come with some great ideas. The issue is a rubric. right? How do I grade this? How do I award a grade for this, right? But if I'm saying to them, you will be able to communicate in this way versus the paper way, or in addition to, I have to open it up. So it becomes crazy sometimes, right, of what they present. But then I have them share their work. One thing I learned from art school that I was doing prior to, I even do more so now, was sharing your work publicly. I have students share their work and have them critique the work, which really advances their work and their thinking skills. So yeah, a lot of work, but a lot of fun. I'm amazed what they do with the tools, right? You know, I'm amazed. Yes.
This afternoon in the lunch, you had talked about coming to Wheat Street.
Right.
When there was 50 people there that were all older than your mother.
Right.
And now you're running, I think you said 500 or something.
Around 300.
300.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being such an old organization, what things have you been able to put in place to help turn that around? You mentioned that you bought several flat screens, but when we're thinking just organizationally, you know, in terms of what steps did you take to say, okay, our first order of business will be to do da-da-da-da-da?
My first order of business, taking them back, we make it to the Gospel of Mark. What is the church called to do and to be, right? It's called to share the gospel and transform the world. We harped on that from the very beginning. Let's get back to the Word of God. Let the Word of God inform what it means to be the church of God, the Church of Jesus Christ in a city like Atlanta. I then argued I had to create a sense of urgency, right, to have them to change, right, that if we don't change, we die. Now, we don't change to live. We change to offer life, right? We don't share the gospel to grow the church. We share the gospel for the gospel's sake, and the church will grow. Are you following me? Then I said, if the world has changed, same argument, how do we change? So I can't preach the old way. We have to communicate differently. So we had to revamp the website first. We paid a photographer to get professional images of our church on the website first. So the church looks empty on the website, because it was. Are you following me? So I began this process, and I began to help them see themselves. I put a GoPro on the pulpit one Sunday and let do a time lapse so they could see how empty they were. They didn't realize how empty they were. They thought they still were full. They had become comfortable being empty. So when I showed them a 1,700-seat congregation with 50 people, they said, ooh. Then I did a 4-part I paid a student to do a 4-part documentary about the history of the church that interrogated its future. And then once they bought into the Gospel of Mark, we are called to share the gospel. If we don't share, we die. We have to change. So what does change look like? And I began to process that change, right? Series of leadership retreats to deal with mission for ministries. We have 3 focus this year. One is outreach, sharing the gospel. We partnered with the local school down the street. We're now partnering with Georgia State up the street. Number 2, quality worship from beginning to end. And number 3, Christian education that's transformative. So we began to revamp Christian ed. When I got to the church, no Bible study, low attended Sunday school, we were revamping all of that, right? So we take Christian ed very, very seriously. That transformed the church. I believe when the Word of God gets in you, it changes you. I'm just that stupid, right? I'm just that simple, right? I believe the Word of God is that powerful. When taken seriously and it's taught and preached, it actually transforms folk. And now this new year, it's required of every leader to be in study. Otherwise, you're not qualified to lead. That was a new phenomenon for my trustees who would come to church and go into the counting room and count the money. You can count the money after church and I'll stay with you, but you're going to hear this sermon. Right? And then we begin to look at the visual component. So we begin to realign our money to put more money in our media ministry, more money in outreach. We partner with this local school, which is a very kind of low-hanging fruit that's creating a lot of blessings for us. For example, we're now doing a game truck for the kids during their report card period. This church had no kids. So we do this game. We're going to do this game truck on Saturday when they get the report card. So I went to the school to speak for the assembly. We paid for the assembly, bought a podium and a popcorn machine. They let us bring in our church ushers to hand out programs. Long as I know your question. And then we're doing this game truck. So I said to the people, like 500 people there, kids and parents, who are going to come? They're all going to come, right? Game truck. Kids come play games. We're going to do hamburgers, hot dogs. Then on that Sunday, every kid who brings his or her report card to the pastor and he signs it, they get a goodie bag. Guess who's coming? A bunch of kids are going to come. The second thing with Georgia State, we're doing this mother's meal. Georgia State kids who want to be with folk who look like me and love eating mama's food. So we're doing a 4th Sunday mother's meal. What is that? That means the mothers of the church cook. You eat their food and take home a goodie plate with pound cake. Who don't like pound cake? Are you following me? So for them, and then so what I did last week, we did career week at the school. So I had some of my more senior members come and talk about how they were blessed by being with the kids. Because you're getting something out of this exchange, right? And that's beginning to change the ethos of the church. You following me? Right, that's what we did. Come on, one more question before I go home. Okay, here and here, go ahead.
So, Dr. Watkins, I might be a dinosaur, but I am an advocate for face-to-face communication still. Mm-hmm. And I believe as Jason Da Silva was talking about, so much communication is now done through the different electronic mediums, and it counts as communication. Mm-hmm. But do you see any dangers or cautions to society through giving that much of ourselves over to communicating through corporate-controlled media?
Yeah, I do. And I think there are tons of cautions. I mean, one book I will recommend is Craig Detweiler's book, I, Gods. I think a great book. And Craig Detweiler, of course, cautions us. There are definitely cautions. So while I make this argument, I'm very conscious of the cautions, right? And I'm not arguing that we exchange the face-to-face for the virtual. What I'm arguing is that I think the virtual enhances the face-to-face. But we have to be very cautious, right, of what's going on. So I'm not saying enter in without being critical, without being reflective. We're not allowing our theology to guide us. But what I'm finding is the exact opposite. We're not trying to enter in at all. Institutions are really fighting it, right? So instead of letting it shape us, let's shape it, right? So I believe that in this digital world, we have a responsibility to be engaged, to shape how we use it. I mean, for example, back to this wonderful woman I've been married to for 35 years, we have a policy that we created at our home for her and myself, what we call a lid down policy. We're going to actually watch this movie together. And not have any device in our laps, right? Which is the tendency, right? We actually take our Apple Watches off because they also beep if you don't control them otherwise, to spend time together. So I think there are definitely moments that we need to be very cautious. We're also very cautious of what we share and what we don't share. Like I don't share things from the inside of my house. I don't share my personal stories. You won't see me and Vanessa at the basketball game or the concert. I don't share that, right? But then how do I then help those who I minister with? What should guide their sharing? Right? What are the new norms? And I think we have to be part of that conversation. That's my thought. Over here, I think. I saw a hand.
Actually, that touched on the question I was going to ask it, and maybe if I can ask it in a different way. So how do you help people in your church or your students think about not just doing bad things online, but the fact that you're working with platforms that were designed for very different purposes. So, you know, they obviously want to sell you things.
Right.
And there are studies out there, in addition to a lot of the positive things you pointed to, the fact is that these technologies can limit our creativity. They can limit our sense of intimacy with others. And so I'd like to hear you say more about how you help people think through technology critically so that they are not losing agency when they engage with these platforms.
Yeah. For me, I think that instead of allowing the technology to dictate how I use it, I want to have us to think very critically how we dictate our use of the technology. So, for example, how we think about settings I can literally cut off and stop. For example, let's talk about this about selling me stuff, right? How ads follow you. You can cut that off, right? How when I go to Starbucks, and I drive my car, if I leave that app to where it can give me notifications, say Starbucks is around the corner. So I can control those things. I cannot buy into the Amazon, how you can instantly buy stuff, right? I do understand that Apple's trying to sell me stuff. So I'm saying, how do you go to the behind the scenes and control those settings? Those settings are not automatically set. You can begin to unset them. So I do a lot of that kind of backside of what's happening there. How are they following you? How do you cut a GPS off? How do you start allowing them to know where you're at? You can say no to this stuff. You can say don't allow, and it still works in a different way. So I think thinking about not just accepting the app as it's given to us, but how do I control the app and how I interact with the app? Make sense? So I'm talking about that constantly, right? What's the back end here? You know, how do you go into your settings and change settings? Because if you don't, those settings will change you, right? And I don't want us to worship the technology. I want us to use the technology to folk to worship God, right? So I have to control it, not let it control me, because it's meant to control me and to dictate and to actually move behavior. Much like when I go to the grocery store, right? The grocery store sets you up. Right? Come on now, it sets you up. You're in the line waiting. You were not going to buy a Snickers bar, right? Or you go to McDonald's. That board sets you up. I was going to get a salad. Right? Or you were going to get a medium, but the large is 45 cents more. So same thing with these apps. Realizing what they were intended to do, now how am I going to repurpose them? By controlling them, not letting them control me. And I always have us read Craig Detweiler's book, I, God. And I think that's a very cautionary tale, right? Another book, It's Complicated, another cautionary tale, right? So I'm also trying to read things that are very critical as well as things that are moving us forward, while also saying how do we shape it for a godly purpose? That's kind of the underlying theme, right? How does my theology of gospel and community and love and justice feed how I use these technologies, right? Even if I'm going to use these share images or make movies, it's really about how do I move the ends of showing how God's working towards justice or calling out injustice, how I want to use my camera as an example. The great photographer Gordon Parks said that his camera was his weapon against injustice. So I'm trying to use these technologies in a similar way. Well, friends, in the words of Carol Burnett, I'm so glad we had this time together just to have a laugh and sing a song. You all know the rest of the song? Or we'll teach you young folk later on. So shall we end? How shall we end? Let us pray. Oh God, we thank you. We thank you for you are a gracious and a good God. We thank you for being a God that thought it not robbery to send your son Jesus to die for us while we were yet still sinners. But God, you so love the world. God, help us to also love the world as you love the world. To love enough to care and to share and to change. But God, in the midst of this revolution and transformation, may your Holy Spirit guide us. May we not forgo wisdom and patience and a theology that guides all that we do. And in the end, God, empower us to use these tools for your glory, to share your wonderful gospel, that those who do not know you as Lord and Savior may meet you one day. Now, oh God, bless this assembly, bless this institution, bless its now, and bless its future. It's in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ, we pray and ask it all. And the people under the sound of my voice that wants to make a good AME preacher / on loan to Baptist feel good, say it. Amen. 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 One more time. Yeah.